Welcome to this session on Insight Maker storytelling. If you have questions along the way, there are only a few people here, so don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask the question, and I'm pretty sure I won't manage to get lost in the process. What I want to use is the Insight Maker template that I developed that I use now to start with if I'm going to create a relationship model, simply because a number of things are set up as defaults and I don't have to go back and reset them every time I create a new model. So that and sometime later today I will do a video to go along with this that explains what the defaults are that are set up on this particular template. But I set up the text to be green, the arrows to be blue by default, so if I want red ones I have to make red ones, and then the outline for the stock and the variables to be white. It's close to what I use in Kumu, so I'm just familiar with it. So the thing is, I have been developing relationship models and simulations for a long time, and at some point I finally came to realize that I had been inflicting my models on other people, and it would have been easier if someone had told me that long ago, and maybe I would have smartened up sooner. Though, because I would send the models to people, and after they would make their head hurt for a while, they'd send back a note like, well, that's nice. And I found out what they really wanted to say is, why'd you send this to me? Because I would not give them a relationship model in a way that was easy for them to understand what I thought the model was trying to surface in terms of insights or understanding. And someplace along the lines, I made this connection between the relationship models that I develop in a play. So that if you go to the play and you sit there and you watch the relationships unfold between the actors from one act to another, if the play is done reasonably well, at the end of the play you leave and you take the story with you. Because as Bateson said, it's the pattern that connects. If the playwright walked up to you and handed you the script and 5 minutes later said, what do you think? You wouldn't have a prayer of understand or being able to comprehend that script in 5 minutes. It's just not presented in a way that enables you to readily or easily understand it. So fortunately, both Kumu and Insight Maker have very nice storytelling features that allow you to take a model and unfold it in whatever manner you think that it makes most sense for your audience to understand it. So this template is just a reinforcing structure and a balancing structure. And I just wanted to use something that wasn't too complex, because the storytelling features are extremely simple and you can use them regardless of how complex the model is. So if you go up here to the share feature and select storytelling, it pops you this dialog box and you simply say that you want to enable storytelling, and then these two buttons show up here. And then you can decide, do you want storytelling to never automatically start? You want it to start for editors, non-editors, or you always want it to start. And that's a choice that after you interact with it, you'll figure it out. And then you can go ahead and add steps. And there are only 7 different kinds of steps. Excuse me, my throat is a little dry this morning. 7 different types of steps that you can add, and you group them so that they happen as you tell it to advance. So the first step might be set up. So for that particular group of things, I want to go ahead and change the visibility of the model, and I want it to go ahead and apply it to the entire model so that none of it is visible. See, it says leave blank applies to all. So I didn't have to specify anything. So if I then go ahead and apply this, Notice I now have two buttons that show up down here at the bottom. And storytelling is a lot like building a model. You want to go ahead and do it and test it piece by piece so that you know that each piece that you create is doing the kind of thing that you want it to do. So I tell it I want to view the story, and it gets rid of everything because that's what I told it to do. Now, the one thing that you will probably learn painfully well, which it took me a long time to get over, when you're in storytelling mode, any changes that you make to the model are not saved. So if you're in storytelling model mode and there's a bunch of stuff on the screen and you change it, it doesn't get saved. And then when you exit from storytelling, none of your changes are there, and you're in a panic because you don't know where everything went. Sooner or later, you finally realize that you want to make sure that you're not in storytelling mode. And the thing that Scott did was notice that this comes up now. Edits to the model will not be saved while viewing in storytelling mode. So when you go into storytelling, or if someone enters the model, and it automatically starts, that dialogue will pop up and remind them that they are in storytelling mode. So let me exit storytelling. Let me go back into edit and say that there's one other thing I now want. I want to go ahead and say change visibility, and I want this label to show up. So all of the items that are part of the model show up on this list. Now notice that all of the links are not differentiated. One of them looks much like the other, which is why there's an option to add from diagram. So if I click on this and say add from diagram, it adds that piece. If I clicked on this link and said add from diagram, it's adding that particular link, even though I don't know what the name of it is. Insight Maker knows internally what the name of it is. So I don't actually want that there. I just want to go ahead and change the visibility so that now, if I apply this and view the story, the first step, what it does when it starts is it shows the title as part of that first group of actions. Now what I'd like to do is to go ahead and say, do another group of steps, and I want to say balancing, and I want to change the visibility, and I just want to go ahead and change the visibility on this and apply that. Now you can do more than one item at a time. It's just I'm doing this because it's, I don't know, I hope it's helpful this way. So the first group of steps simply shows me the title, and I do a step forward and it shows me the savings account. Now, if you had comments on the individual items, the person could mouse over them and click on it and show them. Let me go ahead and exit this. Click on this, go over here to the note section and open it. This is the money in the savings account. So to go with that first step, here I could go ahead and say show message, which means you can type a message. This is the first piece of the model, and say apply, so that now when I view the story, it puts that text down here at the bottom. So you could unfold piece by piece by piece and describe every piece as you're unfolding it to the audience. You also have the option of being able to say, rather than show message, let me go ahead and say show note as message. That will take the text that you put on the individual item, and it will display that as part of the story. So the next piece is, where is my note? Oh, sure. I have to tell it. I have to tell it what it is that I want the note message for. So if I select this item and say add from diagram, so I could actually show the notes from several different things at the same time. So now if I do now, so immediately you see the benefit of doing something and testing it to make sure it works. As you become more and more familiar with it, you probably can do more things before you test them. It's very easy. So now it says this is the money in the savings account, which is the note that's on that individual item. If I now go back and say, okay, rather than that, I don't want that. Let me remove that. Let me change the visibility. And what I really want is, I want this. I'm holding down the control key and shift selecting multiple items. I could hold the shift key and drag around multiple items. But this way, I've selected all of these items and the label at the bottom and say add from diagram. And then what I want is to add another step, which is show note message. And here, I just want the note that's on here. So I'll apply this. So now when I view the story, it displays that whole loop, and this is the text that's applied to the loop label in the center. This is 90%, excuse me, of what you do as you unfold the story. It's piece by piece, simply looking at the components of the model and unfolding them in the way that you want to present them to your audience, to allow them to walk through the sequence. So to do the second part, I could just go ahead and click on this and say group steps, call this. Okay. This one's mislabeled because this should have been reinforcing. You people should let me know when I'm going off the deep end. I want to go ahead and change the visibility. I want to hold down the shift key, select all these items, add from model. Then I want to go ahead and show the note. And I want to show the note from this piece and tell it to apply. So now when I view the story with the first piece, I get the first loop and then I get the second loop. Someplace in here, I probably should have also added, if I go back to setup, when I look at setup, when I change this visibility, I also should have added this. So now I've added that piece. So you can add a piece, subtract a piece. It's very fluid in terms of how you work with it. Initially, it may feel a little rough, though. For unfolding pieces, that's pretty much what you use. There are some okay, that's the majority of what you use for unfolding a story, because of the fact that Insight Maker is written in JavaScript. And Scott Fort Monroe developed this amazing API, and this is all of the commands that you can call in JavaScript to get Insight Maker to do stuff for you. down here at the bottom, there's a couple of things called show top bar, toggle sidebar, top bar, update the sidebar. So if I come back to here and go back to the beginning of the story for setup, and I add a piece called run action, which I want to happen at the beginning. So you can move these around. You can take things out of folders. You can put them back into folders. Sometimes it's a little tricky. I have a sequence that I use on an ongoing basis, which once you learn things, you remember them and use them over and over again. Uh-oh. Sorry, I'm running into another part of the screen that's here. Insight Maker, close toggle bars. So what this is this is a JavaScript command that says toggle sidebar, question mark. If it's open, if it's closed, open it. If it's open, close it. So it toggles it open and closed. And this piece says zoom the model to fit the space available. So now when I execute this and begin to view the story, it gets rid of the top bar and the sidebar. And when the model is unfolded, it will unfold it to fit the space available. That's the commands in here. A lot of it has to do with you can show messages, or you can prompt, or you can execute URLs. If you're simply unfolding relationship models, the majority of this is noise. You find someone that does a model that does something that you like, and you recycle it. The thing about Insight Maker, as I said, if you can see the model, you can do a clone of it, and you can then look at it to see any part of it that might interest you. Now, to do something a little bit more complex, let me go ahead and look at this particular model, which was a model developed by Sturman and Repenning at MIT about credit never happens relationship. And it has a more complex or a more involved story associated with it. It's still simply unfolding the pieces step by step, but it does the pieces as it made sense to me as I was creating it, and I'm doing it loop by loop by loop, so that when I then go ahead and view this story, well, it starts and it shows the actual and desired performance and the gap that exists. And it then talks about the fact that based upon that performance gap, the organization can choose to work harder, or the organization can choose to work smarter. Now, notice specifically what was done here is the opacity. This wasn't made invisible, but it was dimmed so that it's easier to see this loop from this loop that was previously displayed. If you look at that in the definition, where when I first did that, I showed all of the parts of the B1 loop, but then here, notice that this is the B1 loop and the opacity is set to this level so that it's dimmed, but it's not invisible. And then I go ahead and show the B2 loop, and then I show this particular message that I put in there. So it walks through this piece by piece. And it's just more pieces, but it's the same steps put together one after another. You can then, God, hold on a minute. I hope my mic was actually muted. Because Insight Maker is a simulation environment. This is that same model turned into a simulation model. And the intent was to attempt to not describe the model, because the model was described in this portion. This is a more involved set of relationships because you had to make it work as a simulation. But for storytelling purposes, it was to go ahead and say, this is what happens in a standard configuration for this environment, for the simulation. But if you then go ahead and say, there's a performance improvement requirement by changing the performance by 5, this is what happens to the simulation, the different variables as part of this model. And if you were working harder, and this is if you're working smarter, and this is if you're doing half and half. So in terms of that, looking at the internal components of this, while the run action is still the same kind of thing that I showed previously, down here into the baseline, it's actually setting values for the different variables that are part of the simulation model, and then going ahead and running the simulation and showing the message. And then changing, closing the windows, changing the variables, and running the simulation. Or this was just to go ahead and close the window, do a change, and show a message about what was going to happen. Then this is for working harder to go ahead and say, we're going to change this particular variable, run the simulation, and describe what just happened in the environment. So with the components of this API, you can change the values of variables and alter where was it here? Instead of having to figure out or remember, well, I want to demonstrate this, so I have to set this to here and this and this and this, and show it to somebody, and then I have to change it to this and this. You can go ahead and set it up so it unfolds it in the way that you want the simulation to be presented to someone, and have it describe what you're changing. And then you can open up and tell them they can go here and actually change the values and do the simulation and play with it to their heart's content to get a better sense of how the different variables influence or impact the result of the simulation. Bob, you said something about missed the preview, doing preview. And I don't think I understand the comment. You want to unmute your mic, Bob? Inside Maker features. Oh, oh, what is this? This is Bob posted a link about doing preview, and I don't quite understand the comment. So if you turn your mic on, Bob, and clarify, maybe it's helpful. This is simply a part of the features help that's in Insight Maker. Now, there's another aspect of Insight Maker that I didn't talk about in the previous session on the introduction to Insight Maker itself, which when I was doing Insight Maker simulation, which has to do with scenarios, or a way to do scenarios. there's a primitive called a button. Where is it? Oh, an interactive button. So that you can go ahead and create a button, and this is a button, and this is a button, and they will execute some set of code when you click on them. So because they're buttons, once you create them, you have to hold down the shift key to actually select them. And then over here you can see this is the action that was coded to go along with that particular button, so that it says, it sets the start time, the length, the units, sets the values, and then it runs the model. So the story that was set up here was to go ahead and unfold the savings account and then run the simulation for the savings account, then show the balancing loop and run the simulation for the balancing loop, and then say, okay, you can now run them individually simply by clicking the buttons, so that if you were going, you wanted to show several configurations, or the results of several configurations of a simulation model, you could set the parameters all up in a button and then just click the button to say, okay, here's the baseline, here's the first iteration, the second iteration, and it would end up resetting all of the parameters that are part of the model and running the simulation, so that you're not back to trying to remember where you wanted to set values to demonstrate things.
And Gene, that's something you could just reveal the buttons at that last step, right? So that you don't. That's something that could be an action where you.
Oh yeah. So when I unfolded this model, I could have left out the buttons and just, when it finally got to this last place, then shown the two buttons.
That's great.
With this comment. So that if I exit this story, the buttons are like like anything else in terms of the bank interest. I don't know where it was that I actually made the button. Well, why don't I just go look at the story? Oh, I did, so that the buttons are in fact not visible until the very end.
Okay, that's great.
I don't even understand my own story. So if I look at it, then they must have been change visibility. Oh, I simply made the opacity of everything 100%, so that the two things that weren't displayed ended up. But I could have just gone ahead and displayed those two buttons at this point. Any other questions?
Gene, what I'm trying to accomplish is like during innovation and disruption sessions, use design thinking and theory of constraints and exploring ideas to show how different business models or different process variations can actually do different things within constraints, or how you wake out of constraints and then simulate what might happen. So similar to the MIT thing you were showing, can you give me some ideas on how I can use this in real time? For theory of constraints, design thinking.
Well, in terms of you end up building the simulation, and the constraints are part of the structure of the simulation, and you then go ahead and produce probably a flow through the structure, and then once you increase the flow to a certain point, the constraint begins to have an influence on the results produced by the model, and you could then, in other words, part of the really nice thing about Insight Maker is if I built this simulation model and I go ahead and I simulate it, right? And I then say, okay, I want to see the influence that certain things have on this model. If I go ahead and link the model to result, or link result to the model, that allows me to actually mouse over the individual elements and see how they changed during the actual simulation. But it also allows me to go over here and say, okay, if I change the ratio of how I'm working, I can see the instantaneous changes in the result of the simulation model simply by changing that variable and watching what happens. I'm not altering the model, I'm altering some of the parameters in real time and being able to see what happens as a result of doing that. So that if you coded the constraints into the architecture of the simulation and then could vary the extent of the constraint, you could see the influence that it had on the result of the overall structure. You can also do to do sensitivity analysis so that you can vary. Let me find it. Give me a moment. Sensitivity analysis. This is just a stupid rabbit birth rate model. And if you simulate it, it simply says this is the population of rabbits based upon the birth rate. But if I come up here and say that I want to do a sensitivity analysis and I want to do 50 runs and I want to change the values of the initial population of, what am I changing? Hold it. Oh, okay. This varies from 5 to 0.5 to 1.5. I haven't looked at this model in years. So that it's going ahead and doing 50 runs with that random variable in there. And it then goes ahead and shows me that this is the way that population varies based upon changing the birth rate of rabbits and gives me confidence regions. When you don't look at models for several years, you forget what you put in them, which is a great case for actually writing notes about your thoughts when you develop them. Did that help?
Yeah, thank you. It did. I think I have to get in there and actually start to put some business models and ideas and so on to actually test it out for myself.
That's absolutely the key point. Get in there and play with it. Do something. And you know, if you're not extensively familiar with Insight Maker, you can go to Insight Maker and you can look, you can explore insights based upon the tags that are there, or you can simply search. There are 165,000 models in this environment. Some of them probably should be in a landfill someplace, and some of them are relatively good. And you'll notice if you look at what has happened recently in terms of new insights, this one was edited 2 seconds ago and 5 seconds ago and 9 seconds ago and 58 seconds ago. And oh my God, there's an awful lot of them that look the same and they're not done by the same person. Somebody's teaching a class someplace using Insight Maker, and all of the students are cloning each other's models. So, and here's the one that I worked on 1 minute and 37 seconds ago, so that you can search through here and find, you see, this is one I did, I was 3 minutes ago and 9 minutes ago. So you can keep an eye on what people are doing. There's some agent-based simulation models in here. Some of them are not in English, but Insight Maker doesn't care what language it is. So you can search, find things that might give you ideas, things that you can build on, which was the whole intent of the environment to begin with, was to make it easy for people to build and share models, qualitative and quantitative, and allow other people to find things that sort of provoke thought and be able to say, well, this looks like a good starting point. Let me clone this and build on it to make it into something that's more useful to me.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions? If you go, help. This is a Kumu project, which contains practically everything that I knew about Insight Maker at one point in time, so that if you walk through this, it begins assuming that a person knows nothing and covers everything that I think I know piece by piece. So here's the basics in terms of how to build some simulation models, and then there's turn this off, creating a bunch of sample models, and then here are some more examples that I created to provide people with a sense, and then here is a basic set of features that are in Insight Maker that I thought was a sensible order for things, and how to do sharing in terms of import, export, printing, embedding, and then the various tools that are there in terms of macros and optimizing and goal seeking. And so. I mean, I find that there are aspects of Insight Maker that I use quite infrequently, and I have to go back and read my own notes. I mean, one day I puzzled this thing about link model to results. I forgot that the button was so damned obvious on the graph, and I probably spent a half hour trying to figure out what it was called before I could find it in my notes that explained how to go about doing it. So I added some more tags to it to make it easier to find in the future. So, okay. I would, if you're up for an experiment in terror, I would eagerly invite you to sign up for and attend the session on Thursday, when we will attempt to work out an approach for doing qualitative relationship model development on the web with a group of people without destroying each other. I've done a lot of it in groups of people together in a workshop. I've never attempted to figure out how to do it in an orderly manner online. And we're going to, because I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody, we're going to use tariffs as an example to start with on Thursday and see how it goes from there. The sessions that have been done to this point have been primarily just foundational sessions to make sure people had a sense of the facilities of Kumu and Insight Maker. The real exciting part is actually doing model development, not talking about the capabilities of software packages. So, okay.
Thanks, Gene. I just had a question about the leading to that upcoming group modeling. Are you going to primarily, I mean, what I'm finding from attending these sessions is that the real power becomes in connecting Kumu and Insight Maker, right? Because I think while I think the storytelling aspect of Insight Maker is interesting, I think only in so much as the way it unfolds the simulation model. But I think in terms of as you keep showing, even how you use Kumu to connect the larger story, and then be able to take a dive into Insight Maker. I'm just curious, with the group modeling, is that going to be focusing on one tool versus the other, or how they are related? How do you plan to approach that?
The initial intent will be to do qualitative relationship models, and we'll do it in Kumu. Mm-hmm. Kumu is far, well, for developing the relationship model, Kumu is not actually more fluid than Insight Maker. It has a couple of aspects of it that it knows more about loops being loops than Insight Maker does. Mm-hmm. There's only a couple of fine things that you can do in Kumu that you can't do in Insight Maker, but you can work around it in Insight Maker. The presentation facilities in Kumu are just phenomenal, though if you're going to do a story for a simulation, you need to do it in Insight Maker. Mm-hmm. Though I have shown that I can do the qualitative relationship model in Kumu and unfold it, and in the next Kumu slide, the Insight Maker simulation pops up, and you can run the simulations inside of the Kumu presentation model, and it's mind-boggling that it all works. It's pretty close to magic.
Well, this has been really great seeing it's like you said, seeing the capabilities. I'm really excited about where it looks like the next few events are going with how you really deploy it. And I think you're right that, I think it's nice to see what the differences between the two tools are. But I think, I'm just trying to gauge how I work and how I would approach it. And I think your point too being that it doesn't really matter where you start, because it's all going to kind of connect itself in the end anyway. So
just do something.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
I mean, I know thousands of people who claim to be systems thinkers who have never developed a relationship model. Drives me bonkers, okay? Because I can't fathom how you could think about systems without developing relationship models. Try this as an exercise sometime. Try to think about more than one thing at a time. It's not possible. You can context switch very rapidly, but you can't have more than one thought at a time. Though, if you develop a relationship model, you can look at a picture and you can get a sense of, I'll find it in a minute, maybe, you can get a sense of multiple relations simultaneously, and you can think about it collectively. Whereas if I simply close my eyes and attempt to think about a relationship, I can't think about two relationships at the same time. I can't function without pictures. Interrupt. John, you want to talk about this? Unmute your mic.
It's the principle of computer operating systems. It's they're interrupt driven. People think that computers are doing multiple things at the same time, just like they think they can do multiple things in their head at the same time. No.
They're very good at doing context switching.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I thank you all. You'll get an email from me shortly, within the hour, and I look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
Great. Thanks, Gene.